Get ready for the Great North Wrestling Podcast, the official podcast of the HANNIBAL TV, Canada's #1 pro wrestling YouTube channel, with your host, GNW wrestler and the HANNIBAL TV lead reporter, Devin Hannibal Nicholson.
This is Hannibal here, and on the Great North Wrestling Podcast this week we have Bill Behrens, who is a former backstage person in WCW, TNA, and Deep South Wrestling, and he has a background in television, and he is also an agent for numerous professional wrestlers. Kevin Nash, he was AJ Styles' previous agent, Delirious from Ring of Honor, and the Blue Meanie, you could book him through Bill Behrens. Hannibal, even myself, you could book me through Bill Behrens, so he's on the line right now. And if people want to book wrestlers through you, just to get that out of the way right away, what's the email address where they can contact you?
SBI Show Business Inc., SBIBookings.com, with an S at the end. So SBI Bookings with an S.com. And everybody's listed on the side, and then if you want more info, some people have limitations. You know, AJ's still listed, for example, because, you know, if somebody wants to pitch me a movie or something, but in terms of his wrestling life right now, obviously he's sort of preoccupied.
And I'll just say this to everyone listening right now, in case there's promoters listening. I have tried to book wrestlers through sites like bookprowrestlers.com, very unreliable sites. Eric Sims, I've tried to book both Val Venus and Haku through Eric Sims in the past. He's extremely unreliable. But you, I've been booking wrestlers through since 2007, guys like Jeff Jarrett, Christian, Kevin Nash, Al Snow, and I've never had an issue. So you're very reliable for any promoters listening and want to talk to a booker that's actually going to produce the talent and make sure they do the pre-media interviews and stuff. But I just briefly glanced over it, but how did you actually get into the wrestling business from the television business?
I'll tell the shortest possible version. Well, back in the day, I was selling TV shows all over the country starting in 1980. And I was working my whole life. I grew up in the TV business. My dad was a producer, and I was his child star, as was my sister. And then you grow up, and I said I would never be in the TV business, and then I got sucked in selling my dad's TV show, which back when we were doing it, you literally went station to station and convinced people to pay you money for the show. So, and then one year we did $1 million doing that, so we did a good job with a little teeny children's show called Kids World. And it was on all over. It was on in Canada, I believe. But anyway, but I go to conventions, and I was always a wrestling fan. Grew up in Florida, Eddie Graham promotion, who wouldn't be? Gordon Soley, how do you learn wrestling from him for sure. And so as a fan, so I'd be walking around, and I would end up interacting. And in many cases, there were wrestlers that came up to me, like Eddie Mansfield, when he wanted his TV show syndicated. So over time, I had met Jerry Jarrett, I had met Joe Pedicino. I had met all the various people that were involved in wrestling in some fashion, and was interacting with them, but really not that actively. It was more passive. If I could help them get on TV, I did, but there was no real job involved. And then in 1993, Jerry Jarrett reached out because he had read a letter I had written into the Pro Wrestling Torch, and he wanted me to set up towns for his son to promote. And the end of the story is I did, and Jeff didn't want to be a promoter. He wanted to go to WWE and be a star. So Jerry said, well, then if we deal with the contract we have, we both agreed he'd be paying me a lot of money and he wouldn't be getting anything back. It was a really bad deal at that point if Jeff didn't want to promote the markets. So we came up with another deal, which is, Bill, take our show around USWA and let's see if you can get it on TV stations, and if you build up enough stations, maybe we can do something with it. And we got it up over 50% of the country, which again was station to station back in the day. And then he brokered a deal with WWF at the time where they came to me and they contracted me as a consultant, and they contracted me to basically sublet a show I didn't own, which was the USWA show, but they bought it from me with Jerry's permission and paid me a certain amount of money and put their commercials in our show, so it became their show. It was part of their syndication. And that was the beginning, and I went back and forth doing that. I did it. Jerry went to consult with WCW at one point with Bischoff, and and I went to WCW for a year and a half after being with WWF. Then I went back to WWF. Then I left WWF and was distributing the stuff myself, and then WCW came, and we were doing development. By then I had my Wild Side company where I was sort of a promoter, but more doing a TV show that was developing talent, which I learned was my real skill, developing talent. And that led inevitably to WWE coming back to me in 2005. We had started Wild Side in 1999, and we were into our 5th year, and wanted to hire me again to do a new company. They had had various companies before, going back in the old days. Les Thatcher had a development deal. Ohio Valley was the longest-running one. Even Burt Prentice had sort of a half-assed deal for a while in Nashville, but that didn't work out, and because that didn't work out, I got the WCW deal at one point, and WWE and I had always courted. We always talked about it. You know, Jim Ross and I did, and other people did, and then finally they came to me and said, hey, we think we want to hire you. At the time, I was working for TNA. I had started with them in 2002, and it was 2005. And so they said, well, here's what we want to do. We want you to do the show like you do in your building with Wildside. Vince would want you to shut Wildside down because he would find it competitive. And I went, okay, cool. Like Wildside's competitive with WWE. That's awesome. But anyway, so I said, fine. And that was
at the time, AJ Styles was in Wildside too, right?
Yeah. He had just WCW had ended abruptly in 2001, and immediately TNA started. He had a chance to go to WWE, said no because he would have had to go and move for about $500 a week to Les Thatcher's area, Heartland, up north in Ohio. So he was just getting married to a wife that was somewhat younger than him, and they were just starting to establish a life. So he didn't want to leave that. And he, had a job in addition to wrestling, so he was making more money than he would have made to chase the dream with WWE. And then TNA came along, and theirs was, hey, we're going to do this weekly pay-per-view, and that's all we got right now. And it's in Nashville that you can drive to. Well, that was like the Holy Grail. So that's where we ended up. I drove every week. He drove every week, often with me. And TNA's history is what it is from then. Amazingly, they've lasted in some version all the way till now. And I was with them off and on until 2008, except for a 3-month period. And in that 3-month period, when I wasn't with them, and after I'd shut down my promotion, which I had while TNA was going, because remember also I was involved with the NWA, past president, vice president, board member, until we lost it in a stupid litigation. And the end game was that TNA was using it, so I was involved in that. So I had a lot of balls in the air. But TNA dropped the NWA, so that went away, except I was still with it. So all of a sudden WWE had this opportunity, and they offered me a pretty good amount of money. And I went, oh, okay, because TNA was pay-as-you-go at the time. So I went, okay, fine. And the original deal was they were going to come to my building. That's what they proposed to me. I would be in charge of the television, and they would find a separate facility and train the wrestlers. And I think they might have even identified Billy at that point, Bill Demott. And but I don't remember that part for sure. I just know he was in play before Joe was. But they came to me, and then they came to my building, Dreamer, and I forget who else came along. And they all looked around, and Dreamer went, oh, man, this place is freaking awesome. I would have loved to be doing, it was like an ECWS kind of environment from his perspective.
Right.
Because it was, beat up and old and rustic, but looked good on the inside.
And Dreamer was a talent guy at that time, for anyone that's listening to this that doesn't know. He was under Johnny Ace, I guess, in charge of the developmental talent. Right, because there had been the transfer from JR, and Pritchard was with JR, and John got rid of Pritchard to bring his own guy in, and that was Dreamer. Okay.
So Tommy was the point guy on this, because it was coming out of the talent division. And this was, older time before the present regime and the new direction, which was a total changeover, based mostly on how badly some of this other stuff went. And that's what I walked into. So the original plan was they'd come to me. He loved the building, and then at the end of, really going, this is like the most amazing thing ever, Dreamer looked at me and said, but it'll never work. And I went, "Oh, wow, you were putting it over so good. I thought we were good to go here." And he said, "Yeah, this is great. This is perfect. It's all wired for TV. You just plug it in. We could do it immediately. It's awesome." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Problem is, we never bring Vince here. He'd hate it because it wasn't clean and bright and big league from the perspective, a different perspective." And so I went, "Oh." So he says, "Okay, so we're back to the drawing board. We're going to have to find another facility, blah, 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 blah." And I went, "Okay, fine." And so some time passed. I forget how long, but it doesn't really matter. I'm working for TNA while this is all going on. And then finally called back, and he said, "Well, we've got a wrinkle now. Basically, their Triple H wants to help Joey Hamilton and bring him in, because he was good to him at WCW, and he's got a good training mind. And here's our plan now. And the plan now is you'll be hired and you'll be in charge of the TV. You'll be in charge of helping the guys with the promos, training them to do television, which is basically what you did with Wildside. Billy will be hired to do the basic training in the ring, and Joe will be hired to run the facility. And he'll be in the spot of owning the promotion, which was the way they worked it back then. Like Danny Davis owned Ohio Valley, and WWE controlled it. Eventually, Steve Kern owned the Florida one. They controlled it. Less the same thing, and this was the same thing we were going to do, except they decided, instead of me, that Joe was going to be the guy that owned the company. And as a carrot to him, they let him use the Deep South name, since it was his, which is a name he had used previously in Georgia when he was promoting for a brief period of time and doing his own TV. I think he did it for a couple of years. I want to say in the 80s, could have been in the 90s, I forget.
And he ran the power plant, for those that don't know, which is where Goldberg came from. And
that's where Triple H owed him, because Triple H came in fairly young. When he came into WCW, and he wasn't the top guy. And Joe spent a lot of time with him. Joe eventually got pushed to the back and was and this is part of, I think, the overall story is, at WCW, Hamilton ran the power plant, established it. He and Sarge, were there doing it, Orndorff every once in a while. But over time, what ended up happening was that the administration kept changing. And more or less when Bischoff came in, Joe got moved out of being in control of the power plant and moved literally to a back office where he didn't do much of anything. And over time, you get grumpy about stuff like that when, you've done something well and then people sort of, pee on you.
Right.
So I think, and that legitimately that's the way it sort of happened to Joe. He sort of got brushed aside to bring in a different system as they brought in younger guys and go in a different direction. So that's what Joe had experienced just prior to this happening, but it had been like 4 or 5 years ago, which gives it a good time to fester. So we all get together, and I specifically know what my job is, in fact, to the extent that they didn't know how to write the contract, so I wrote the contract for WWE Legal, consulted with them and literally wrote the contract. I am known as a fake lawyer in wrestling, not a real lawyer, fake, but I've written a lot of contracts. So I wrote my own. So I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew exactly what the contract said. Also, the good and bad of that is I knew what I was supposed to do, but I also knew what I was responsible for. If it was good, yay me. If it was bad, it's my fault, which is why I had to have some degree of control over creative. That had, you can't be responsible for a TV show that you can't create. That's sort of obvious. But anyway.
Did you get them their TV show, by the way, or was that already in place?
Which?
Their actual television time slot, I believe they're on.
No, that's another drama story. But anyway, So we get this thing going, and so Joe's obligation is he's going to run the company, Billy's going to train, and I'm doing TV, and we have a bunch with meetings, we eat a dinner, we in general have a relatively good interaction, but we have clearly, except that Bill knew Joe from WCW, nobody really knew me. And probably the biggest problem we had is neither of them knew who the heck I was, nor cared, nor believed that I had actually done anything, and any suggestion I had was like Bill says in his book, oh, he claimed to have done millions of hours of TV. Well, no, I didn't. I claimed to have done what I had. And that's why they hired me. It was my specific skill. In theory, his skill was to train wrestlers. In theory, Joe's was respectfully to run the company and, be happy if it all works, but more importantly, he's got to, eventually there's going to be shows, somebody has to promote and get people in the building, blah, blah, blah.
What about Bill's claim that in some of those initial meetings, Bill claimed in his book that you leaked some of the information about the meetings to the internet and the WWE office?
That was interesting. First meeting we had, we all flew up, took a limo, and went to a meeting. They all came from not having jobs at the time, basically. Joe had no job, right? And Joe's older and barely knows the internet, so certainly he didn't leak anything, or if he did, it was accidentally telling somebody who leaked it for him and he doesn't even know. Who knows with Billy? I don't know if he was involved in the internet or not. I was at a TV taping for TNA, and they at TNA didn't know this was happening. So, but I didn't have a contract with TNA, so I wasn't doing anything wrong. So I had a return flight TNA had bought to go home, and instead WWE sent me a ticket to go up there for a meeting. I didn't want people to know. What, I want to go to a production meeting and have Jeremy Barash looking at me going, so, blah, blah, blah. Because he always was pretty good about knowing what was going on. As was Bob Ryder and some of the other guys. They were all over the internet. So I show up to this meeting, and the first thing that happens when I walk in the door is Laurinaitis starts growling at me, Bill, this thing's on the internet about this meeting and everybody coming in. How'd this get on there? And I go, how the frick do I know? I'm the last guy that wants it on the internet. And I've been on a frickin' airplane. I was at TNA. Why do I want TNA to know?
And
so
that's before the internet was on cell phones, right? Like
yeah, exactly. This was
2005 or 4, probably.
It was still computer, and there was always somebody at WWE that printed stuff out and distributed it. There was always somebody responsible for that job. But anyway, so I walk in, and the very first thing is everyone's looking at me like I'd leaked information about a meeting I don't want anybody to know anything about. And I go, but they all knew I was actually on the internet because I had websites and I was already doing stuff. Again, I existed. Bless my heart. So anyway, so that meeting started weirdly, but it all worked out in theory. We had several other meetings. We all were in agreement about everybody's role. Joe and I had a big boy talk with John at one of the Atlanta WWF shows, WWE shows. And, this is what Bill does, this is what you do. Joe, do you have any problem with that? No, everything's fine. And, and everything's great. Okay, so Joe has to go find a building. And I'm just waiting because until this gets going, I got nothing to do. So I'm getting paid for a while doing nothing. Not that long. Because that's the problem is they immediately said to Joe, once he said I found a building, they said, okay, we need to start moving the ring in and get the guys down there. We got to get this thing going. Got to get moving. Well, the problem was he had found a building that had no water, no power, and no bathrooms, as Bill accurately says. And so they still rented it. Well, then I asked them, I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they say, well, we're going to try to figure out a way when it's, because there's windows. There are big windows all the way around this thing, so light will come in. So we're going to try to put the ring up and at least get the guys down there to work out with Bill some. And I said, well, do you want me to be there? There's really nothing I can do to help Bill work out with wrestlers. And they said, nah, go down once and just see the building because we really need to know what you think about it. So I did. I only went down one time during the first couple of weeks. And that was when there was no power. And again, I'm TV guy, and I'm supposed to, and in theory, I'm going to set the place up for TV, light it within whatever I can get Joe to approve, buy cameras within whatever Joe approves, blah, blah, blah. I put up speakers, whatever. You have to plug stuff in to do that. And work has to be done before I can run wiring. So I got nothing to do. And I can't buy anything because we don't know where everything's going to be totally yet. First of all, the building had a huge problem in that it had pillars throughout it. So the biggest area where the ring could be really wasn't that big because the pillars cut off access at 2 different points as you went by. So you had a very specific place the ring could go. And that's the only thing I did. I went one time. Laurinaitis came in. on one of the days while the training was happening. I watched the training, and at the time, I thought what Billy was doing was great. The drills were good. The teaching was good. Stuff was working out fine. Everybody looked happy, sweating a lot because it was hot, but everyone was happy. John comes in that day. He says, "What do you see?" And I said that this is going to be a bitch to shoot because you don't have enough room to back the camera up enough. No matter where you put the ring, because you're going to want people here, right? And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Okay, well, look at that over here. Look at that stuff that's in the middle where the offices are. All this stuff's going to block. So this is our space." So we mapped it out. And I said, "And this is your ring because you got a big ring." So now we don't have much room. I mean, based on the way the ring's going to be, you're going to have to walk in the front door and go 4 steps to the ring almost. It's that close. So we have a problem. But we understand we have a problem. We also understand that the die is cast, the building's rented. We're in, whatever we do, what ends up happening happens. So finally there's power, finally there's rooms, finally there's everything else, and I start coming every day. Billy remembers me not being there. That's a lie. I was there every freaking day.
What about what he says that you were buying stuff like light bulbs and extension cords, and when you would...
Oh, very much so. No, I had to, because that was my job. The problem was Joe didn't want to spend any money. So, like, when it came to the lighting, I said, "Joe, we need to get a light grid, which will be this many thousands, or I got a guy who can jerry-rig this thing with halogen lights and make it okay. And it may not be perfect, but we can get it so it's going to work," because that's what I did for a long time. It's just going to take a while to set the lights. But inevitably, you'll be able to cut shadow out, and you should be fine. And I said, "So what you want to go for?" And, of course, he went for the cheaper option, because the halogen light option was, literally under $300 probably. So we did that. What cameras? The cameras we bought were the cameras Ohio Valley was using that had been approved by WWE. That's why we bought the cameras. So it wasn't my call. It was WWE's call, because it was the same cameras Ohio Valley was using, and it was at the time the top of the line for small model digital. But we were in a flux because analog and digital were barely converting yet. Digital was slow on the video camera side. There were no chips, and the stuff now that's being used, there, direct access to the internet, stuff like that. It was you had a tendency with digital to constantly have to get to analog at some level, because we were still using VHS tapes at the time. It's 2005.
Right.
So,
and there wasn't a live feed ever to the office like there is now either.
No, but I had... The end game of all this is, regardless of whose memory it is, I know exactly what I did. And I've donated a bunch of my own equipment and set it up. So they didn't have to buy a bunch of stuff. The whole sound system, everything else at the beginning, I had brought. Monitors. That was our downside, by the way, because it led to the biggest controversy. But our monitors were old-school TVs. Not, because they didn't have flat-screen things, really, unless you bought really expensive stuff.
So they were
Or to get a standard TV monitor would have been a greater expense, but you can go out and get a cheap TV. So that's what we bought as monitors. And so I had, the long and short of this is, I had the camera set up fine. Billy's wrong that somebody else did it. It didn't happen that way. But regardless, that's fine. And I had also hooked everything up, including Joe's office, so that there were a variety of places where there were multiple televisions all hooked up to the central system, and there was camera on the ring full time. So the starting point for the company was, we weren't ready to do TV, Joe kept saying. "We can't do TV." I went, "Fine. When you're ready, Joe, let me know. I'm good to go." And the office kept telling him, "We really need to do this," and he said, "I won't let it happen."
Were you guys being paid for the TV, or were you paying to be on TV?
So they go, well, that's another stupid story. I had a meeting. We went to lunch, Joe, Johnny, and me. And that's when I identified that we actually had to hire referees, because they had no refs. I brought the only ref, Mike Posey, who was literally there for free every day, because they hadn't thought to hire a ref. Yet Right. They were supposed to do a TV. Well, unless they want one of the wrestlers to be a ref, we need a ref. That's sort of logical, right? But that's how silly this thing was set up. There was really the thought process involved was terrible. But anyway, so we have this meeting, and I say, hey, I've got a relationship over at Sports South, and the guy there will cut us a deal and give us an hour for $500 across their entire Southeast network, which at the time was about 12 million households. And John said, oh, that sounds great. And I said, also, I've closed my Wild Side down, and what I'm doing right now are best of Wild Side episodes on my TV distribution that was still at that time probably, it wasn't really that good anymore. It was only about 20% of the country at that point because the industry was changing. But regardless, it was a little bit more TV and some of it in the South. I said, so right now I'm just buying time doing reruns, but I'm re-editing stuff so it looks like sort of new. And, so I eventually will let that distribution be Deep South too. And Joe basically said, I don't want to pay $500 for a freaking, So that's Big Grumbly. I never did that deal. Spin forward, Joe ended up going to Deep South, going to Sports South, and who loved them, as Billy says. But of course they did because they ended up paying $1,000 instead of $500 a week. So, bless their hearts, they got the deal I told them they should get, and it's the only reason Joe knew it existed because he didn't even know it existed before that. And the only reason and then the guy that I cut the deal with for half the money charged him the normal price. So, good job.
Now, Bill said he was being paid by Jody. Were you being paid by WWE or by Jody?
No, my deal was very specific. I had an annual salary and a very specific position. But the problem is, again, these guys did not know who I was in their world, good or bad, and I just hadn't crossed paths. And regardless, they had and I guess Billy hadn't even heard I was doing the development at the time and working regularly because, he was I guess he was just traveling around doing his thing. So we had that, let's see, what else does Billy say that's wring?
He said you were supposed to be there every day.
Which is awesome. The thing about promos, that everyone hated me working with promos. That was a big to-do. Again, they didn't want me to do anything. I should not have an opinion with talent, which meant it was very hard to critique anything without Joe or Bill jumping up my ass, literally. So promos were one of the areas where clearly they were mine, but clearly nobody was happy I was doing it. So when we were there, the three of us, authority figures, they would all hover around and be very quick to not like what I said. Yet the reality is, as Dreamer would be able to tell anyone if they asked him, I actually was writing promos and crafting characters for guys that were in danger of losing their jobs. And one of them, Palmer Cannon, for example, was one of the first guys out of there. He did the authority figure thing until he had a hazing deal with JBL over in UK and quit the company. But regardless, that was the first guy out of Deep South, and the only reason he got out is that I wrote a promo for him that we sent to Stephanie, and that led to him getting hired. So we were doing things, but it was just pulling teeth to do them. And when we did promos, he says, oh, the guys didn't like me. There were numerous guys under the deal. Kid Cash was under the deal and had worked with me in TNA. Johnny Swinger under the deal worked with me in TNA. I knew Angel. I knew Tony Santarelli because he'd worked with me in Wild Side. Ray Gordy worked with me in Wild Side. It goes on and on. There was a tremendous percentage of the crew that already worked with me. To suggest that they didn't like working with me is to just sort of make it up and pull it out of your ass.
Right, and I've never heard of any reports from people ever complaining about you, but if you go on the internet, you could search pages and pages of people complaining about him.
Oh, it got comical at times. Paul Lee came in to work on promos one day, so that means he's working with me. So Joe went to his office and sulked, and Billy went into a corner and sulked because they had no participation. They weren't involved at all because, again, it wasn't their spot.
Right.
Bill was supposed to train, Joe was supposed to run the building and eventually produce house shows, and he had to control the budget because his deal was based on a certain amount of money, and Billy's deal was based on what Joe was doing, which is why Bill and Joe had to get along, or Bill was going to lose his job. What nobody realizes, what Bill says I did, I could have done. Inevitably, I could have given into the process and done the only thing Joe wanted me to do, which was to stand up and point a camera. That's all he wanted me to do. and he really wanted to bring Neil Pruitt in. He really didn't want me there at all. And so everything that happened they complained about. You know, the cameras were wrong, the picture looks bad, the lighting's wrong, all stuff that it had been approved by Joe.
Right. And were you supposed to be there every day or not? Because he also claims that you were supposed to be there every day. And
I wasn't there every day.
Okay. So that's an exaggeration.
There was a room, again, everything was monitored, but because Billy didn't want me out there while he was training, I had a center room that was the technical area that had monitors, and I could see everything that was going on and hear everything that was going on. Billy forgot that some of the times and would say something stupid about me, because it was that stupid. Not on my end, but on Joe and Bill's for darn sure. So this went on for 3 months. It wasn't a month. It was 3 agonizing, hideous months. One of the worst times I've ever had in wrestling.
And then he claims you snuck out the back door to quote him in your book.
And that's totally wrong too. We had a meeting because the office said, "Hey, this can't be that bad, Bill." But again, the office, and Bill is correct, the office was constantly on Joe and Bill, never me. Actually, I never got bitched at. But they were constantly being bitched at because, you know, occasionally talent would complain about Billy, and, you know, and Joe wasn't doing things on the timetable they wanted. Joe wanted to do it in a southern sense. He was fixing to do it. It's a phrase we use here. Fixing to do it can be a day or a year. You never know. I'm fixing to do it. And that's what we were doing. We were fixing to do it, but we were sort of doing it half-assed. We set a camera up, we taped every workout, to make sure that was a liability thing, and we sent it to the office, and I'm assuming I never did that. That was done by them, so I never know.
And Bill did have the ability to turn off that camera, right? Because I trained there for a month, and I saw it. It wasn't a live feed. It was just basically a hard camera.
Yeah, it was a tape. It was literally a tape or a DVD at some point, which I'd set the system up because the office kept saying, "Bill, can you send anything? You know, anything. Help us out here." And I went, okay, fine, because they actually wanted to bring people up. I mean, Miz was there and was probably the guy most attention was on and was actually the most prepared vocally. Not in ring necessarily, but vocally, he was good to go. He really knew who he was, and he really had his character, you know, well defined. Other guys were better in the ring. You know, like Ray Gordy was better in the ring. Drew was better in the ring. Drew Gallows, who was there as freaking Deacon. So there were some guys that, you know, were better ring guys. Micah Taylor, a guy that never made it, better in the ring. So that was going on. But there was a lot of other dumb stuff. I mean, one of the areas I wasn't fond of is Billy remembers that, you know, everybody was bonding. But the reality was Bill was very cliquish. And he had a group that if either you were part of or you weren't when you were on the crew. Clearly Johnny Swinger wasn't, based on the fact that Bill identifies him as a guy I saved, and that's true. There was at least one time I saved him from getting released because they tried to do it, and it was BS. But he isn't the only one I saved.
I could tell you myself that it was cliquish from my own time there, even though I was non-contract, so no one paid attention to me, but I definitely saw everything that went on there because I was off the radar.
Yeah, it was, you know, Micah Taylor was like one of the top guys, and amazingly, now, if you talk to Mike about the experience about Billy, he's very negative, which is weird because he was like the guy in the prime position, but they were, and he's an example. He and Tony were doing this tag team, babyface tag team, and everything I tried to do to help them got screwed up because they were given a bad gimmick by Joe, and they bought into it, which was they were extreme athletes. But then we do vignettes, and Micah could, because he could surf, he could skateboard, so he could do some stuff. But Tony would trip over his own feet. We tried to do a motorcycle spot with Tony where all he had to do was drive the motorcycle up and stop, and he couldn't do it. You know, so this was an example of creating a gimmick, you know, just pulling it out of your butt and giving it to the guys without them really believing it, knowing what it was. And part of what I was trying to figure out with everybody is who are you, and how do we get the character over? Because TV is characters, WWE is characters. Joe was focused on, you got to learn to wrestle. And Billy Demott was drill guy. I thought, I loved Bill's stuff at the beginning, but when I left 3 months later, the exact same training was being done with everybody every day. No one had graduated past grammar school. They were doing the same drills every day. They were running the same long laps outside where half the guys blew up.
And there was guys like Sonny Siaki there that were seasoned veterans that didn't necessarily need all the basics.
Kid Cash, Johnny Swingers, I mean, whether Johnny was young, but at the same time, he'd done ECW, he'd done TNA as head Cash. They had plenty of ring time. Their bump card already had notches on it. You know, and if you're a wrestler, and I'm not, but I've bumped and now go to a chiropractor on the regular. So I understand that...
You recently had a match, didn't you, last year?
Yeah, it was terrible. But again, I did, and I'm 61. So it takes a toll, and you have to be careful. And so these guys learned that because, well, they took a lot of bumps. So when you get to there and your day with Billy is bumping all frickin' day, you know, why?
There's at least 100 bumps a practice, I would say.
But why? If you've already bumped and you already know how to bump, why are you bumping? What are you supposed to be there to learn? Well, if somebody's got experience, what's your character? How we get that character over so WWE wants to pull you up to the main roster? That's the job. The job is not to do preliminary work with every wrestler forever. There has to be a finishing school, and that was one of the weaknesses Deep South had when I was there. I have no idea what happened afterward, only from the reports of other people. You know, Kenny Omega was there for a half a minute, but wasn't given the creative ability to do what he wanted. He left. That was an example. I wasn't there when he did it. But Mike Posey was there, and he's been one of my clients for years, so I learned a little, because Michael won't say anything bad about anyone. That's just not, it's not possible. So he got along with everybody, thank God. And he ended up having a couple and a half years and a couple WrestleManias with WWE as a ref. So it worked out for him. And it worked out for others. Deep South, though, didn't graduate that many people. They had people there that graduated, but almost everybody ended up having to transfer through Ohio Valley before they were pulled up. It just, nobody trusted Deep South while I was there and when I left. When I left, Dreamer came in because Johnny said, "Oh, you have to be able to fix this," and and I was miserable. So I said, "Look, I'm turning down a lot of money, guaranteed money, and I could have come in one day a week, like Bill said, and get paid. I could have done that easily. I could have been a deadbeat and just stayed home and drank beer all day. But I actually wanted to do my job, and my contract said I had to do my job. So." Right. I was stuck a rock hard place. So we had a meeting. And Billy's sitting in the back. He really didn't contribute much at all. There's no bad. Joe was in his office chair in his office area that I had basically built for him. And so he's there. And for some reason, and Dreamer's behind me in a chair, and I'm sitting in a chair. We're sort of looking at them because this is a rectangular room, if you can figure. Billy's in the back. Joe's off to the left. And then for some reason, Nick Patrick, Joe's kid, Joe Jr., pulls a chair up and sits down like 3 feet in front of me.
And it's a very small room, too, from what I remember. If it's the same office, it's not very big at all.
Yeah, it's the last office in the back before the back door. So anyway, so we're sitting there, and we have this meeting, and it goes terribly. But during the entire meeting, Joe Jr. is, Nick Patrick, who must have had a bad day for some reason. Don't know. Don't know the specifics of what would cause. But he's like, it's like growling and like at any moment he could strike, just tear my throat out. And I'm not paranoid about this. I'm watching it going, what the crap? And at one point, Dreamer leans forward and whispers in my ear, "Don't worry, Bill, I got your back." And I turned around and I went, "Tommy, not my back I'm worried about. You're behind me." So that was sort of that was the atmosphere of it, and the meeting went terribly. All the things that I suggest are problems, Joe made clear. No, this is how it's done. Joe didn't want me involved in the creation of the TV. He wanted to create the TV. He allowed me to sit in and look at him put this guy against this guy for no frickin' reason, or create a story that made no sense, or whatever. Because Joe was booking very old school. His mindset was very old school. And old school is wonderful in wrestling in terms of teaching some of the technique. how do you work a hold? How do you sell a hold? That's where Joe was brilliant. And when he did that, it was some of the greatest moments I ever saw in Deep South. Him expressing the psychology of selling things. It was like when Fit came in, same thing. That was Joe's skill, but he really wouldn't allow it to play. His skill wasn't producing modern television and getting people fired up about something. It was different. And Billy, again, was just do drills and bump a lot.
Right.
So
and Bill actually says he hated you in an excerpt from his personal journal in his book, too. So I guess he was kind of biased towards you due to his hatred.
Yeah, I have no idea why he hated me, because I didn't know him and I had never done anything to the man. I didn't like that he was cliquish. I didn't like that he was going out and partying with the guys, going to bars and stuff, on a lot of the nights. And the guys were staying out late as a result of it in their bonding thing. I thought that was wrong. But if I ever tried to help somebody, like Nick Mitchell came up, who was one of the Spirit Squad kids at one point, if Nick Mitchell came up to me one day and he said, you're hooking up all this stuff. And I went, yeah. And he says, I can't get my stereo to work. And I went, well, it should be pretty easy. I can, where do you live? And he went, I'm like a mile down the road. I said, well, during our lunch break, I'll go and see if I can hook it up for you. And then Billy finds out about that very innocuous thing and comes over and berates Nick Mitchell for suggesting I should go down the road to hook up his stuff like it's the world's worst thing that ever. But Nick wasn't one of his guys necessarily.
And he was inviting people to his house according to his own book.
Yes. Many of the things that Bill is now very positively discouraging, he might not have done that as much back then. And accordingly, it was a very odd place for me. And because I was coming in and this was a business, it was also this dysfunctional business I've been in, and wrestling is dysfunctional on its own. But anyway, after this meeting we had, which went hideously bad, Dreamer and I walked out together, and he said, this will never work. And I went, thank God, somebody agrees with me. And he said, I'll tell John. And he said, okay, here's what we'll do, and I'll cover this with John. You need to just take your stuff, anything that's yours, because I don't trust how this is right now. Anything that's yours, just take home, and once you're done with that, don't come back. And, no big deal, just go do that. Well, again, the stereo system was mine, the sound system was mine, a lot of the things that I had hooked up in the equipment room, well, they were mine, because I was trying to help. So when I left, which was during a normal day where Bill says I was never there, Joe happened to be, because Joe didn't come in all the time. Joe would come in late or come in, for just things he wanted to do and then go home. He wasn't there all day either.
Right. And he never left his office the days that he was there, other than on the TV review days.
Yeah, I was there every day. Joe, maybe not so much. Billy was there every day. He worked hard. I have to give Bill his due. He was there, and he did 2 sessions of training, and he was a machine.
Until eventually they added Dave Taylor. Then he was.
Well, they sort of had to, because Billy was so redundant. But he hated Dave Taylor. They used to bitch because Dave Taylor worked the wrong side of the body, and he used to drive them crazy. Because I used to hear that coming back from reports I was getting. But anyway, so after this over, maybe that day even, but I don't think so, because that was such a contentious day. I think I just went back the next day and went in, Billy's training, and some of the guys came up and said, so what's going on? And I said, well, I'm leaving. And they went, oh, shoot, do you need any help? And I went, don't do that. It's just going to be heat on you. Just go back, do whatever Bill's doing, pay no attention to me. I'm the man behind the curtain. But thank you. And that was a lot of the people, because I was not disliked. And if I was, I didn't know the people that disliked me, and if they ever want to tell me, they can. But so I picked up my speakers, these gigantic speakers that were near the ring while they're training.
And you're not a big guy for anyone that hasn't seen a picture of you.
Yeah, I'm a little guy. So it's not, and actually I actually think a couple of the kids did help me because of that. Even though it wasn't that bad, but these are, anyway. And so I have to go all the way down a hallway past the door where Joe isn't, and out the back door, and I loaded my car up, and then I went back in and said goodbye to a couple of people, and then I left. And like they told me, I didn't go back. And then the nice thing that WWE did, and again, it's because they saw that this was a big cluster, is I had been approached. Thank God. It's and literally, it's a thank God kind of moment. One of those things you don't know how they happen, but they do. Jeff Jarrett got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I have this idea, but I think you're the only one that can do it. We need to tie our people up here at TNA, and we don't have the money to do it. So why don't we cut deals where you book the guys out on indies, and we use the indies basically to subsidize guaranteed contracts?" The end of the story is that's what I then did from the end of 2005 through an early part of 2008. Was we said, I left WWE, and WWE waived my non-compete because I told them I've got a job I can jump right into, and I'm giving up this money, and I really don't want to wait because I just need to get this bad taste out of my mouth. Please let me go do this. And they said yes. They waived. They were wonderful. And so I went over and I got this job, and I wrote a contract, and that contract ended up being 2006. The first contracts TNA did for I think 12 people were the first time TNA started guaranteeing money, where you got money on the weekly, and then we came up with a way that booking them on the indies got the money back, and if you ended up doing really well in the indies and there was more money than what you were paid at the end, you got paid based on that extra money too. So there was an upside.
Okay. And
that's how TNA got started in really building a roster that you could count on. The AJ was signed, Daniels was signed, Joe was signed, Abyss was signed, Storm was signed, Harris was signed, Machine Guns were signed. Who am I forgetting? Petey, I think. Yeah, no, Petey was signed. Sanjay was signed. Austin Aries was offered one, didn't take it. Roddy was offered one and didn't take it. And I forget who else we had, but that was the core. So, again, things happen for a reason. I have no idea why. I'm not bitter, except this was one of the worst times of my wrestling career, other than being sued on the NWA thing, which is the second worst. Just because it was so stupid, so hideously bad, and I couldn't fix it. Normally I can fix things. But then I went right into TNA, and if I hadn't, maybe what ended up happening, which was them starting to hire a bunch of people on the full-time and growing the company, and the spike numbers were going up. Remember, in 2008 when I left, and it was just a little bit after that Jeff ended up having to leave, there were 1.5 million people watching TNA.
Right.
It was actually a pretty good time.
Compared to now, I guess last week they had less than 300,000 viewers for Impact.
Yeah, it's a different world. When they, and this is totally tangent from what we were talking about, but when TNA shot for the moon and did the Hogan thing, which created the single greatest rating ever, and then everything went steadily downhill regardless of what story you want to tell, the highest rated period of time was the main event Mafia time that Dutch and Jeff were booking. And before Hogan, the highest rating was the empty arena match between Sting and Angle. Things were working. House shows weren't working, but the TV was working back then. House shows were a problem just because there was no local promotion, but we did what we could.
And for WWE's development, it recently came out, Jim Cornette pointed it out, that they've been losing actually millions, the NXT system, over the past few years.
That's the business plan.
Yeah, you think that's part of the business plan? Do you
No,
think...
it is. No, that was the business plan going in. It was well-known going in. Well, not well-known, I guess, but known if you were supposed to know or could know. No, but the expenses going in were tremendous. And it's a gamble, but it's been a successful gamble, and it's led to another revolution in the business from a WWE standpoint. You've got one 500-pound gorilla in WWE. TNA had a shot and got in the ballpark, but now is nothing, and Ring of Honor is the only viable thing that's going right now because of their partnership with New Japan and the magic of the Bullet Club right now, and the Bucks and what they're doing and the synergy they're doing now. That's all part of the business on the internet. They're being very good social media-wise, better than WWE, I think. So that's the most vibrant area going on right now. But I lost my train of thought, so you're going to have to help me here.
I was just wondering if you think that, I guess, should there be more than one performance center where there's possibly a system where there's multiple, like, mini territories happening, or do you think this system is the best system, even though it's technically losing millions, but I guess it's for the greater good?
Yes, and it's building brands along the way, and it's led to this where I was heading. And thank you. There's a new evolution in the business from WWE's standpoint, which is that you can now hire people based on their indie creed and allow them to be the person people know they are. AJ was not the first example, but he was one of the first big league examples because he went straight to the bigs. He didn't go through NXT. He came in. They didn't trust that he was going to get over, but they threw phenomenal on the screen. The crowd pops, and the Royal Rumble happened. Everything else has happened since. And prior to that, they had started doing it with Samoa Joe, and letting people be who they were. And now that's a big change for WWE because, the only guys that came in back in the day, Jeff Jarrett came in as Jeff Jarrett, but that's his name, and they didn't decide to change it. But Terry Taylor was the Red Rooster. They brought in Rock and Roll Express, but it wasn't a long-term thing. Things that Vince couldn't own back in the day. If you came in under your own name, odds of you surviving or getting a push were much more limited because they didn't own the mark. But when AJ came in, we had no problem retaining his trademarks, and you saw them vetted one by one. You saw Phenomenal go up. That's his trademark. Then eventually you saw him put his hands up with his P1 on his gloves. That's because that had been vetted. That, it's ours, or Allen's. And, but that's the biggest change in WWE now is they're open now to recognizing what they used to ignore. Everything only existed within the WWE universe. Right, honestly, Nakamura and AJ right now is WWE thinking outside of a box going into WrestleMania if that match does end up happening, because there's a lot of other go-to matches with AJ, but Nakamura is their rematch from New Japan. Nothing from WWE. So it's a different deal. And the WWE in the old days would have never thought that. They would never even thought or considered that world.
Right.
So that's one of the things that's going on, and that's why the Performance Center and what Hunter has been doing very, very well, I think, in terms of positioning. WWE has to control its environment, but you have to embrace the uniqueness of the people you bring in and not piss on what they've accomplished and start over. I mean, it's just stupid anyway. Why would you start over? If you've got a guy that's over, let him be over and build on that.
And I won't get into your TNA thing because we've gone into great detail on the Deep South already, but I noticed you mentioned the other day that you witnessed the infamous TNA fight between Ted Hart and CM Punk, and I was just wondering
it was like a really bad UFC fight in that we walked out. I forget who I was walking with. It could have been any, because I usually ate with the same people. I usually ate with Rudy the Ref or Posey or, golly, who else? We had a group that used to eat, Rick Santel, blah, blah, blah. And we all ate down at the White Trash Cafe where only the greasiest fatty foods were fed to wrestlers. And when we're done, I'm walking up, and all of a sudden to the left, there's a fight that has literally just started, and from the very beginning, it was takedown by Teddy, Punk down, and Teddy's just destroying him. And I think Sabu was walking up with this, but regardless, Sabu ran in and did and Teddy, when Sabu was there and got Teddy to focus on him, he broke for Sabu. So Sabu did the save for Punk on that particular one. But the whole thing, if it lasted 20 seconds, I'd be surprised. It was short. Punk had no offense and was just covering up. Fortunately, and he also wasn't badly scarred out of it either, because, Teddy was pulled off pretty quickly. It wasn't like it lasted a long time, but there was no chance, at least from what we were seeing, that Punk was going to get much of a comeback out of it.
Do you think UFC is going to give Punk the second match on his contract? Because it's been about a year and a half now or more since...
They can. He'll probably lose it, but, you know, that was one of the strangest things is Punk going into MMA. I could see a healthy Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson going into MMA.
Right.
That would make sense to me. But Punk was never really that guy, at least not in my impression. He's always been difficult. Phil's always been his own unique guy. But, and polarizing. Either you loved him or you hated him, which is part of his appeal. He came across as a rebel and played it well because it sort of is him. And, he is very egocentric in what he does. If he breaks up with a girl, he still doesn't want her dating other people, for example.
Okay.
That kind of guy.
And there's recently been speculation that CM Punk might be on this September event that I guess Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks are putting together. They want to attempt to sell
that's under the assumption that that's going to be more than what it actually is. Got to remember, Cody and the Young Bucks are under contract to Ring of Honor, and that involves a certain amount of exclusivity in the United States and in various places abroad, part of Canada. So anything that's going to be going on that particular thing would have to be logically based on all of the key players. Would have to have Ring of Honor involved and would have to have a payoff beyond just being, these guys going out and do it. Remember, the Bullet Club and what they're doing is a truly diversified brand now that's being utilized effectively by multiple businesses. And one of the businesses is the brand itself, the Bullet Club. But the Bullet Club was created and is technically owned by New Japan. But it's being utilized by their business partner, Ring of Honor. Then there's being the elite thing where they have more control over it, and those appear to be done autonomously. That they're doing these things on their own. They're just wild and crazy guys.
Yeah.
But those are actually very specifically tied to the booking now.
Okay.
So this is all a package. So whatever happens up there, it's going to be a great show, and it'll have people that are normally not involved. So who knows? Punk could be one of those guys. It would certainly be easy for him to do. It's right down the road.
Have they actually found the location yet? Has it been confirmed where it's actually taking place?
Not 100%.
Okay.
But I think you can pick. If I were doing it logically, like in TV, to launch a TV show back in the days, you needed at least 2 of the top 3 markets, and ideally, you always had to have the first one, which was New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. So if you were picking where are you going to do this for the biggest bang to your buck, you pick a large thing. The number 4 was always Philly. 5 was San Francisco. So you had, those were your TV markets or your big buck markets because based on population and extended audience outside the population. So it will be within that narrow range. They're not going to be doing it in Madison, Wisconsin.
Right. And what do you think their chances of success are? Because that's a pretty, you're aware of the crowds, even for WWE, aren't really selling out other than the very major.
No, it's an experiment, but it's an experiment that should be encouraged and blessed. It's if they can, wrestling's challenge is WWE appeals to the audience they have and tries to get kids involved by being kid friendly, right?
Right.
Where they have a problem at times is in the middle. The most impressionable audience, the audience that launched ECW, hormone-driven men, and young women, an audience that's very difficult to control. Well, that's the audience that's following what the Bullet Club does and what the Bucks are doing. It's not like the Bucks are kids, they're older guys with wives and families now, but still, they're the cool kids. So what this is trying to do at some level is make it a thing. Right now we're in a business where, is it trending? I have no idea what that even means. But is it trending? Hashtag whatever. I don't understand hashtags literally. I do, but I don't. I don't understand how they're really functional, but they are important now. If something's trending, it's a big deal. Our president thinks it is. Hell, our president's, on social media every 5 minutes just saying anything that comes into his feeble brain. And, so that's our audience that we need to try to encourage to go see wrestling that might not have otherwise. When WWE was really big back in the day, 83, and when the WrestleMania started and through the early years, it became a popular phenomenon. It grew beyond the core audience because it embraced the media of the time. Well, the media of the time now is the internet and kids that are watching content on their phones. So that's who we have to grab. The person that does that best is going to be the person that provides the sizzle that allows the industry to keep breathing.
Right.
You know well, wrestling is a performance art. It's an art form. When done well, you cannot duplicate it in entertainment. The willing suspension of disbelief and the actual reaction of an audience to wrestling is the most remarkable thing on the face of the earth. The closest thing is improv comedy. And improv comedy will never make you feel the way wrestling can. But you have to keep finding a new audience to go, oh, wow, that is pretty cool.
That's very true. And just to close this off, because you've gone into great detail and we really appreciate your insights, do you want to talk to us about some of the talent you're booking right now for independent shows and how people could contact you about booking the talent if they're an independent promoter listening to this? Well,
thank you. First of all, if you're a promoter and you're going to use an agent, I highly recommend you use someone who does it as their business, and it's my business. It's what I do for a living. It's not something I do because my dad's in the business. It's not something I do because I want to. I announce every single person that was willing to take a booking, no matter who gives it to them. There's a lot of limited folk that pretend to be business agents for professional wrestlers. It's my job. I've written their contracts. It's different. Like a guy like Barry Bloom back in the day does what I do now, and still does. We work together with Jim Ross. So if you do want to book someone and you want it handled professionally, contact me. If you deal with other people, you get what you get, unfortunately. My website is www.sbibookings.com. There's a long list of folk there. I could go on for a while. The other thing I'm doing is trying hard to develop new talent, but I got to be selective on that. Corey Hollis is someone I've been working with for a long time, talented kid around the Southeast. I'm working with two kids out of North Carolina right now, very specifically Marcus Cross and Griff Garrison. Just debuted for Maryland Championship Wrestling. It's been around for a long time. We're working for 3 different promotions in Georgia. Just did a Future of Honor match for Ring of Honor that's supposed to be posted today, I hope. So that's the other thing I'm doing is I book guys that already have accomplished something and people want to see them, and then I'm trying to find, if I can, some new people that deserve that opportunity. It's what breathes our business.
And I think you also book some Ring of Honor talent, right? Like Christopher Daniels, the Young Bucks.
Yeah, Chris Daniels, Chris Frankie, the Young Bucks, and Jay Lethal are all under exclusive contracts, so they're international and outside of Toronto and Canada. And then I also am working with Flip Gordon now, who will probably end up being another one of those guys that'll be exclusive to the Ring of Honor because he's definitely a guy that should be focused on. Just debuted in New Japan Pro Wrestling, then did a really good job there, and I'm sure he's going back soon.
And speaking of New Japan, I'll ask you one final question. What do you think New Japan coming to the U.S., how do you think that's going to affect their relationship with Ring of Honor?
Anytime you have two businesses that are legitimate, and one business goes into the other business's backyard, and there's always going to be well, what if this goes farther? And that's going to happen at some point. But it may lead to greater synergy. It may lead at some point to a separation. Right now, them being synergistic is to both companies' advantage. And there's no reason to be overly paranoid about it. The only reason why Ring of Honor got into business with New Japan, literally, was that when AJ decided he was not continuing with TNA, we then created a business plan that involved New Japan Pro Wrestling and Ring of Honor is the base. And we had a meeting with Ring of Honor, and we told Joe Koff and the others there at the time that our goal, and that's what the only thing Alan said is he wanted to help the company grow, and Alan was going to, and very quickly became the champion in New Japan. And he was going to be appearing in Ring of Honor. It made no sense for Ring of Honor not to jump on the opportunity to work with New Japan. And at the beginning, it's why. What does that mean? And this is early on. Remember, the Bullet Club had been started but wasn't a phenomenon yet. AJ came over and became the head of the Bullet Club. All of a sudden now the Bullet Club came to the United States in Ring of Honor. And over time, and AJ was involved with both companies for a couple of years, during that period of time, Ring of Honor went from paying on the show to paying guaranteed contracts to being able to hire the Bucks and Cody now. New Japan ended up growing to the point where they now can travel successfully and sell shows in the United States, and both are on domestic television, at least on satellite and cable-type channels, and in the case of Ring of Honor, have terrestrial domestic television all across the United States. So all of a sudden, within that short period of time that started literally with AJ Styles, both companies have become extremely viable. So right now it's to their advantage to get along and not worry about the growth of either one.
And at this point, I guess New Japan in the U.S., they're only going to be doing one-offs in various locations. They're not running as often as Ring of Honor at this point.
The New Japan product is both great and a challenge because, well, there's Japanese involved. It's a minor problem because unlike the Spanish language audience, there's not a gigantic, very narrow specific Asian audience that you can immediately target your program at. There's no channel that's well viewed dedicated to Japanese audience. So you have to try to bring a very specific kind of product, and you have to US it. So you have to put Jim Ross on it. You got to find a way, but you're still dealing with the different reaction of a Japanese audience, the different reaction of the in-ring, the characters that are established to get over in Japan, not necessarily to get over internationally, although some are starting to very well. But they're also more appealing the less you see them.
Right.
So there's that going on. It's true both ways. When the Young Bucks being semi-regular in New Japan is better than them being there every week. Because when they're there, it's a bigger deal and there's a bigger story.
That's true. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your insight, and hopefully down the road we could do maybe a couple other episodes on both WCW and TNA. Sure,
anytime.
All right, and
I've been around a lot of stuff. I've accomplished only a few things. But the stuff I've accomplished is pretty good.
And you're also on Facebook. Your name Bill Behrens. Do you have a Twitter? I think you do, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think that one's William. But I got the Twitter, the Facebook, Instagram. I'm doing the Instagram. I didn't like Snapchat because the stuff goes away quickly. The kids tried to get me to do it, and I went, oh, I like that picture. I'd like to see it later. They go, it doesn't work that way. It goes away. And I went, oh, crap. That sucks. So...
Yeah, I haven't figured that one out either. I'm still figuring out Instagram.
You got to remember, I'm older, so my brain still is going, well, I could make a scrapbook, So.
All right, well, very good. Have a good weekend, and all the information on how to contact Bill will be in the description of this video for anyone listening.
Great. Thank you. And by the way, I'm not grumpy with anybody that worked at Deep South. It was its own debacle, and I just happened to be there at the beginning to help it get going, so I've got that.
That's all for this episode of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. Be sure to visit thehannibaltv.com for Great North Wrestling news, links, and live event information. Subscribe to the Hannibal TV on YouTube and subscribe to the GNW podcast at greatnorthwrestling.podomatic.com for instant downloads of our latest audio content.